Hey, this is Scott Mann, and I invite you to become a part of the grassroots movement that we're mounting to hold our politicians' feet to the fire. Go to contracttoprotectamerica.org and sign the contract today. Thank you.
Welcome to the very first Man Up podcast. My name is Wes. I'm the producer. I'm sitting here with retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, retired Green Beret, and author of the book Game Changers, Going Local to Defeat Violent Extremists, and just overall stability expert. How you doing, Scott?
Doing good, Brother Wes. Thanks for having me and producing this for the very first. I feel like we should have like a marching band or something. I mean, it's an inaugural thing going on.
Drums, things like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I guess the three listeners should probably just should envision that going on. Maybe a bottle breaking against the microphone or something like that.
Exactly. If you could slap your knees in a drummy type thing, it'd be awesome.
Yep. So listen, you know what? Seriously. For those of you listening, my buddy Wes, who has agreed to produce this, we're coming at you from Tampa, Florida. This guy's a real patriot, a musician, producer, sound engineer, you name it. And he's going to be my right hand as we go through this podcast. We've got his beautiful dog Sierra sitting at my left side here, stressed out and laying on the floor, just taking it all in. And we're going to spend some time with you. We're going to spend some time talking about a range of topics. But you know what they're all going to stem around really is different aspects of leadership, Wes. I mean, that is, the older I get and the more I look around at the jackassery that is taking place in our country, I am becoming more and more convinced that we are in a leadership crisis in this country.
Extreme leadership deficit. I mean, we look at the political scene that's happening right now, and I'm a bit frightened by the way our lack of leadership has led us to this place. Yeah,
for sure. But we're going to cover some really cool topics. I spend a lot of time nowadays talking about ISIS and terrorism and things like that. There's some pretty heavy topics, but growing up my adult life as a Green Beret, working all over the world, I've really developed three torches that I carry in my life, and it's defeating terrorism, Islamist violent extremism. The next one is helping our warriors come home.
Yep.
Reconnecting them to civil society.
Absolutely.
At a community level, and the big one for me is restoring leadership to America. Leaving my three boys, Cody, Cooper, and Braden, a country that's better than I found it.
Absolutely, and showing their peers and perhaps them as well some leadership paths.
Absolutely. And I spend a lot of time on the stage, a lot of time talking in town halls and traveling around, and it's striking to me, Wes, how many people they're so hungry. They're so hungry to lead. They're so hungry to stand up and do what they were designed to do, but we've just become so conditioned to not do that.
Yeah, there seems to be a real lack of ideas and a lack of anyone willing to put in the hard work to find and develop those ideas.
Yeah, so if you are listening to this and you're someone who thinks that you should be punching above your weight more than what you are now, if you're someone who looks around at what's going on in the world, what's going on in the country, and you just don't like what you're seeing and you don't like what you're hearing, you know what? You're in the right spot because we're going to be talking about those things. But I think anyone who knows me will agree that despite my numerous shortcomings, and God knows I got a bunch of them, ask my wife, Monty, she will tell you, one thing I know how to do is I know how to punch above my weight. Right. Green Berets know how to achieve big things with small teams.
Absolutely.
And I've spent my life doing it, and I've learned how to do it in a range of places, and I've had to struggle my ass off to learn it. But I tell you, it's so critical. And we're gonna focus on those kinds of things here. If folks listening want to learn how to punch above their weight, if they want to have an impact bigger than themselves, if they don't like what they're seeing in the world with everything from terrorism to crime to just leadership gaps in our schools and communities, you're at the right spot. That's what we're going to focus on.
Right. So someone like me, for example, lifelong musician, always kept up with the current events and stuff like that. Is this a skill set that is applicable to a complete layman such as myself?
It absolutely is. It's one of the things, Wes, that I talk about on the stage all the time when I'm speaking to people on leadership is, and I call it rooftop leadership. Remind me to come back to that.
Yep.
Because we're going to hit that a lot, but it's the form of leadership that I advocate, and it really is the way Green Berets lead. We pride ourselves, Special Forces guys, and we're very different than Navy SEALs, Army Rangers.
Sure,
those guys have way better hair than we do.
Yes, absolutely. Good beards.
That's right. Our specialty is, kind of the modern day Lawrence of Arabia,
yes.
Or if you've ever seen the old movie Magnificent Seven with Yul
Absolutely.
Brynner, where we go into places that most folks don't want to go, and we stay for a very long time. We immerse ourselves in the language and the culture and the environment, and we literally get surrounded on purpose. We connect at a very deep human level in the really rough, outcast kind of places, and we stay there. And then when the time's right, we help the little guy stand up against the big guy, and that's what we've been doing since World War II. Now, you think about the world we live in today, Wes. Think about the absence of trust that we have in our society. Just think about how our kids treat each other on the school bus, how high schoolers treat their teachers, how our politicians are treating each other. Just watch the 2016 campaign. It's a joke.
It's difficult for me to watch.
It is. And it's not hard to see that our trust in our society, which is such a national treasure in America, is eroding every day. No one's really paying attention to it. And in replacing that absence of trust is conflict. Conflict is everywhere. So when you ask me, hey, is this applicable? It absolutely is, because those are the kind of places that I've spent my whole life working, are in these trust-depleted, high conflict areas where everybody is skeptical. No one trusts you. No one really wants to work with you. And you have to inspire these people to stand up on their own and do something they would never, ever do by themselves. And so what if you could do that here? What if you had those kinds of skills here in America, in your community, in your job, with your prospects, your investors, your clients, your kids? And that's really where I focus all my energy, is helping people do what they were designed to do, which is service-based leadership.
Wow. Well, I'm absolutely interested in acquiring a few of those skill sets myself.
Yeah, and they are skills. I still teach Green Berets at Fort Bragg. I am the first guy they see on day 3 of their 2-year qualification course, and I'm pretty proud of that. I'm the first guy that gets to get in front of these young men.
Right.
And I tell you, we talk about the things we're going to talk about here, because in this day and age, if you're going to have an impact, if you're going to move people in a direction that they don't want to go, which is most that's reality today. You've got to have certain skill sets that, frankly, are not being taught in school, and we have forgotten as humans.
Right.
But, we'll spend time on this podcast doing that. What I thought we would do today, man, if you're cool with it, I thought we would spend some time in the beginning, considering what happened with Brussels.
Sure.
And, it just seems like a lot of Americans have terrorism on their mind, at least for now.
Absolutely.
That'll fade. But while it is on the mind of many of our listeners, I thought we might dive into that a little bit and talk about some of what's going on, but more importantly, what our listeners should know about this threat and what it means to them in their life. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's great because, if you've been listening to the news in the last few days, one of the narratives coming out of the powers that be is that as Americans, I shouldn't worry about this. It shouldn't concern me. I should go play golf. I should dance the tango. I should hang out because the chances of me being affected by a terrorist attack are so remote that it's more remote than a lightning strike or a shark attack. But here's my personal connection to this. Okay, so they're telling me that these terrorist attacks are so remote that I couldn't even be connected to them. Let's use the 6 degrees of separation method, for example. And let's take San Bernardino and let's take Paris. Well, I sit back and I think about this, and I'm hearing my leaders telling me that I shouldn't be afraid.
Right.
And that I'm so far removed. And yet I think to myself, now the Bataclan, 10 years to the day of the attack, and I went back and checked my calendar, and some fans actually sent me this, 10 years to the day of that attack, I was performing in that venue.
Right. Wow.
I performed in that venue many times. I watched a video of that show and realized the bass player that was running off the stage was a personal friend.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, that's not a 6th degree of separation.
Right.
That's just a matter of luck, because I toured through there last year. I didn't play that gig. I played a gig around the corner.
Right.
San Bernardino, one of my fans, friends, people that had been to many shows that I had participated in, met him several times, gave his life in that attack, shoving a couple of people through a door.
Wow.
Okay, so that isn't someone that I knew through someone who knew the cousin of the guy that mowed the lawn. These are personal connections. So when I have the leadership of this country telling me I shouldn't be concerned, now I'm concerned. Yeah,
no, it's a great way to tee it up, man. I mean, and I think most people listening to this feel that way. You know, I have this great friend of mine. His name is Bo Eason. He's a really, if you're listening and you don't know who he is, I highly recommend you Google this guy. He's one of the coolest dudes on the planet. He played pro football in the 80s with the Houston Oilers. He's a public speaker now. He's more than that. He's a leadership coach. But he and I were having a really serious talk about ISIS. Mm-hmm. You know, and one of the things that he said that struck me was, you know, most Americans know in their gut that what we're being told about ISIS by our supposed leaders is not right. Whether they're Republican, whether they're Democrat, you know, humans are amazing creatures when you think about it, Wes. I mean, you've always heard that old saying, you know, it's just my gut's telling me something that's not right. That's a very real thing. You know, that visceral feeling that we get when things just don't seem right, when they don't feel right, you know, that's a real thing. And I would ask, you know, if you're listening to this, I mean, how do you feel about what's going on with ISIS and what's happening, not just in Western Europe, but here? And when I go around the country with our nonprofit, Mission America, and I talk to, I talk to so many people in our town halls. I mean, people that are just out there getting it done, moms and grandmothers and small business owners. And I will tell you, they are pretty concerned, and they are pretty ticked off that what they're seeing is different than what they're feeling, you know? And it's running counter to what they know is really going on. And so one of the things that I tell people is, look, this absolutely does affect you. If you think that this is just going to be something over in Western Europe or something that's only going to happen to people that live in New York City, you need to think again. And I'm not some Chicken Little guy, man. I've been dealing with this threat my whole life.
Yeah, exactly.
And I tell you,
you've had that threat shooting at you.
Absolutely. And if I would like nothing better, and I think most of my friends who are warriors would agree, I would like nothing better than to sit on this broadcast and say, or this podcast and say, you know what, we're good. The threat is gone. Mm-hmm. All of us have seen enough combat to last a lifetime. All of us have lost enough buddies to last us a lifetime. My oldest son is going to become, you know, an Army combat officer. And, you know, so I have a lot of skin in this game. And so when I tell you that this threat is very real and it's very related to you, just like you said, Wes, I'm not kidding. ISIS in particular poses, you know, our president says it doesn't represent an existential threat to the United States. That's an awful big word. I will tell you, they are the most diabolical, most dangerous threat we have faced since the Nazis.
Yeah, and the way the current leadership would portray this to us is as fear-mongering. That isn't fear-mongering. This is just fact. This is just and one of the things that I think is important for listeners to connect with at this moment is the fact that you're not talking out of speculation. No. You're talking out of experience.
That's right. Yeah. And, you know, I spent about 22 plus years in the Army, and around 18 of that as a Green Beret, you know, U.S. Army Special Forces. And our job in that regard is to go in, again, to these tribal places, these marginalized places, and stay for very long periods of time and work by, with, and through the local populations of these areas. So, you know, Sunni Iraq, Pashtun Afghanistan, those places, Latin America. And you do that long enough, you start to get a real feel for how humans operate and what's going on, and you start to see the problem,
Right.
from a very different perspective. And I will tell you that the last 10 years of my life in the Army, I spent most of it running the seams, as I call it in my book.
Sure.
One second I would be in Washington, D.C., meeting with congressmen. The next I would be here in Tampa, meeting with SOCOM leadership. And then I'd be out in a village somewhere in Afghanistan, helping local team leaders put this program into place of working with villages. And so what we're talking about here with ISIS, let's just get right to it. Islamist violent extremists. That's how I refer to them in my book, and I think it's how we should refer to them going forward in this fight. These are individuals or groups who project violence or threaten violence on anyone who does not subscribe to their radical view of Islam.
Absolutely.
Islamist violent extremists. Notice I didn't say Islamic.
No.
Now, I don't fall in this camp that thinks that everyone who's a Muslim is, an Islamist. I don't buy that.
As a matter of fact, isn't ISIS a very particular brand of Sunni Islam?
They absolutely are. In fact, one of the major differences that ISIS has, even from Al-Qaeda, is that ISIS has a very distinct apocalyptic mindset.
Right.
They are following, essentially a bastardized version of Islam where they believe they are going to usher in, the end of days, the return of the prophet through an epic holy war that's going to take place on the hills of Dabiq, Syria. Now, the other groups like Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and these others, they subscribe to that narrative as well.
Right.
But what's different is even bin Laden never thought that they would see that in their lifetime.
Right.
They thought that this would be a long, pronounced struggle where they would mount, big attacks, spectacular attacks against the United States every so often to keep the war going. But they never believed they would literally usher in the apocalypse.
Right. So they were
ISIS
more
is different.
conceptual.
Yeah.
Whereas ISIS is like, no, we're really going to do this.
Right. Al-Qaeda was all about targeting Americans, but always on a grand, spectacular level.
Sure.
Whereas, and frankly, they treated locals generally better in these places where they needed to operate from. So from an ideology perspective, what we've got to understand that all Islamist violent extremists have a pretty radical view on the end of days, but ISIS believes they'll do it on their watch.
Sure.
Why is that so dangerous? Here's why. When you have a group that has that kind of will, that has that kind of ideological commitment to any goal, that means they are willing to pursue anything to achieve it.
Right.
Right? And that's why we have to take these guys seriously, because they are ideologically committed to the end of days, to literally luring us into a holy war that they think it is their duty on earth to start.
And they are telling us this.
They're telling us this.
You can read this anywhere. It's
Absolutely.
This is their message.
In fact, if you don't like to read, you can Google a video called No Respite. And it is November 24th is the date, and you can just type in ISIS propaganda video. Watch it. I think it's about 6 minutes. But in that video, they tell us exactly who they are, what they believe in, and what they're going to do. And this was, and it's interesting to note, Wes, that they produced this and released this just prior to the Paris attacks. And right after Paris, they said, this is just the beginning. There's more to come. Then you have Brussels. We're learning now that 2 of the Brussels attackers were surveilling nuclear facilities in Europe. We've got to understand, and again, I want to start here. You have to respect your enemy. One thing that I've learned in combat and as a Green Beret that I was taught by some fantastic non-commissioned officers and other leaders is always respect your opponent.
Absolutely.
Don't ever underestimate your opponent and his will. And don't ever think that he's less committed than you are. Because if you do, that's where he's going to get you.
Yep.
So for everyone listening to this, if you're trying to understand the mindset of ISIS, and it's hard to get your head around, you need to do that. And you need to start by understanding that their will and their ideological commitment to, a horrific end of days scenario is very, very real. Now, let me go a step further and tell you why that matters. I mean, okay, so if you're ideologically committed to something, that's scary, but understand that the prophecy that they believe in results in a epic battle campaign, and that ends with an epic battle on the hills of Dabiq, Syria, where the 80 banners of the Crusaders from Europe and the United States come together, and in the final hours when the Crusaders have the upper hand, the Prophet returns, smotes down the Crusaders, and the righteous Mujahideen are returned to heaven. They need this holy war. They are manufacturing a holy war, this narrative that Islam is under attack by the West, and it's the duty of every Muslim to defend it, that the caliphate is forming, and that there's this utopia, come serve with. This is a real narrative, and it's tied to historic prophecy, and so it really mobilizes young men and women in these honor-based societies around the world, including even the United States, to come be something greater than themselves, to come be a part of something bigger than they are.
They can bring about the end of days.
That's absolutely
and this isn't some science fiction thing that we're talking about that is made up here.
Right.
If you go watch that video,
right,
it's very clear.
Right.
It's a very clear, real goal.
Yeah, and what everybody does, though, here's where the mistake is made with all the pundits on the television and all the supposed, analysts, the experts, is they all sit around and they pontificate on the ability of ISIS to govern, or on the ability of ISIS to operate as a caliphate, or the ability of ISIS to actually achieve this apocalyptic end-of-days scenario. Do I think that ISIS will pull off an end-of-days apocalypse? No, I don't. But here's the question no one's asking, Wes, and that we've got to get our Americans asking of our politicians. If ISIS believes it, what lengths are they willing to go to draw us into that war and make it a reality? That's the question no one's asking. If they need this holy war, right, in Syria to fulfill the prophecy, and they're going to manufacture that holy war, what lengths will they go to in Europe and here to draw us in with an emotional 9/12/2001 mindset?
Absolutely.
That is the part that makes my skin crawl.
Yeah.
Because that's when you start getting into dirty bombs, the use of mustard gas, which they've already used in Iraq multiple times on innocent civilians, attacks on schools, complex attacks like you saw in Paris, here in the homeland.
San Bernardino could have been much bigger.
It was supposed to be. Yeah. I was actually interviewed by the San Bernardino Sun or Star, I can't remember, but the investigative journalist who was leading that report in San Bernardino called me, and he interviewed me on how ISIS recruits. I did several interviews with that paper, but in those interviews, he shared with me that multiple explosives, improvised explosive devices were found in their apartment, along with pictures on this guy's phone, on Farouk's phone, of the local high school, in the entryways, fences, stuff that a health inspector would never, capture, and that there was clear evidence that there was something bigger in the works, and that these two cooked off early, emotionally. But again, how did we respond to it? We gasped for a little while. We put our hands up to our mouth. Oh my God, how could this happen? And then we go back and we watch the Kardashians and The Bachelor and the political antics of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. That's going to be our downfall, Wes. That's going to be what gets us. Yep. Because while we do that, while we episodically come in and out of our, and I don't know how we got here on that regard, like why we can't focus on this threat for more than a day. But it's gonna bite us, because ISIS has figured it out. They have figured out that we only pay attention for a short period of time,
and they're using that to their advantage.
Absolutely. Anytime you give an enemy like ISIS with their kind of will and capacity, don't forget they have a multi-billion-dollar war chest for the terrain and resources they hold in Syria and Iraq, and all kinds of donations. These guys are not sitting still, right? And so now, if you go back to my question that I asked earlier, was what length will they go to draw us in? Then you have to start thinking about, okay, well, watch the video again, November 24th, no respite. What do they say at the end? Bring it on. Bring it on. Show us no respite.
Exactly.
They want, and they will, poke us in the eye until they get us emotional enough that we're drawn in. Even Osama bin Laden, Wes, and I say this in my book, just days after the 9/11 attacks, bragged on a video, I can send 2 fighters to the east, raise a piece of black cloth that says the words Al-Qaeda on it, and all the American generals will come. These guys fully understand that all they have to do is get the American people emotional, hit them right where it hurts, and we will deploy lock, stock, and smoking barrel.
We're sending carriers.
Absolutely. And what is a carrier? Seriously, what is a carrier going to do, or a B-52
Exactly.
against an ISIS element that is embedded in a tribal area of Sunni Iraq or Syria?
They're going to just create a whole lot of trouble.
Yeah. And then the response from many Americans is, well, to hell with them, carpet bomb all of them. Okay. Now let's think about that a second.
Yeah. We know what that involves.
Yeah. Who are you actually mobilizing when you do that? If you carpet bomb an entire village, and we're going to get to this deeper as we go. My book's actually very much about this, but we've been doing this for 15 years. We've been hitting these areas very hard.
We're bombing now to zero effect.
Right, and these are tribal societies where honor and shame and revenge and feud.
So if you bomb someone's village, now they're going to try and exact revenge against you. So what do? They join up with ISIS.
And they're honor bound to do that. Exactly. And because we don't have any responsible presence on the ground in these areas, what's the one narrative that's coming out after the smoke clears?
Well, there's only one narrative because there's no one there to offer the proper narrative.
Right. And so ISIS is on the ground in these areas, and when people are pulling their kids out of the rubble or their husbands out of the rubble, hey, what are you going to do about this? The Americans came here, they did this. What are you going to do? And they are honor bound to pursue revenge. It is a vicious cycle of top-down targeting that we want it to work so bad because it's how we fight wars. But the fact of the matter is, it not only doesn't work, it actually puts us at more risk here in the United States because it invokes a level of honor-based revenge from tribal territories that we don't even understand. Right? And these guys are honor-bound to pursue revenge against us when we do this. And so when you couple that with this ISIS narrative of the end of days and the return of the prophet and the apocalyptic utopia that they're building and this epic battle, we're playing right into it.
Sends a lot of good young men out of those villages hunting that black flag.
Yeah. And so now what we've got to think about is, okay, so if these guys need this manufactured holy war in Syria, if they want to make that a reality, if they want to draw us into the fight, how are they going to do it?
They're going to do something big here.
And their MO for that is different than Al-Qaeda. Look, like Al-Qaeda likes the spectacular attack, and right. ISIS to some degree does too. My friend Dave, and I won't give his last name because he's still operational. Sure. He works for that 3-letter agency on the Potomac.
ABC.
Yep, and he has been working this problem. He has been working in Afghanistan since the 70s. I mean, this guy is a legend.
Right.
And he's my mentor. And he told me, he said, Scott, if you want to understand the difference between Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Al-Qaeda practices terrorism, which is the application of violence against civilians to achieve a political outcome.
Right.
ISIS uses horrorism, and that is the application of violence on locals to achieve social control, much like the Nazis did, much like what gangs do in certain areas or the mafia.
Could you go into that a little bit deeper? Because a lot of people in the States see all these horrible things happening over there. And so they get into this mindset, well, they're doing it to each other. So just let them be. Let them doing it to each other. What you just said with the horrorism, it kind of explains why they're doing it to each other. It's that concept of social control. And I don't think a lot of people here understand that.
Yeah, it's a behavior modification pattern, isn't it? It's a behavior modification technique to compel people to do things that you want them to do.
That they wouldn't normally do.
And ISIS, they default to this. They although their narrative speaks to this utopia, this fantastic place where you can come and live, when you look at how they actually treat locals in these places, it's horrific. They behead them, they stone them, they burn them alive. Any tribal people or clannish people, and that's almost all these places are, anything where they practice what's called Sufism, which is a form of mysticism. It's like a form of Islam, but it involves, local lore and customs. Yes. Those people are obliterated by ISIS. And so what happens is they get them to toe the line with the stick, not so much the carrot.
The stick.
Yeah, and it's a nasty stick. And that's why they cut heads off, and that's why they burn people alive. And then they use social media brilliantly to project those images where it's local. and they bring that local control in at every possible level. And that social control is extremely powerful. And just some of our listeners, think about the images you've seen on YouTube. Think about the beheadings. Think about the Jordanian officer who was burned alive. When you see ISIS doing these things, what do you feel? What do you feel when they do that? And it's a level of paralysis.
We feel it can't happen here. It can't happen to us.
Yeah.
It's over there.
Yeah.
Let them deal with it.
But what they want you seeing when they're on your when they're on your iPhone, Wes, when they're on your computer monitor or your iPad, they do want you thinking they're right there. That's how they come at you. And so they amplify these local horrific things by showing, listen, if you don't do what we tell you, if you don't toe the line, we're coming to your neighborhood. And that's what they want. They want this social control that's both virtual and physical. That social control is actually their Achilles heel. It's actually the greatest opportunity that we have against this group. Now, we'll get into that in more detail, down in this podcast maybe, but certainly down the road. But what I want folks to know for now is, the first thing is you got to, Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese philosopher, said it best. You have to know your enemy.
Absolutely.
Right? You have to know your enemy. And this enemy is hell-bent on an apocalypse, an end of days. They want to poke us in the eye and draw us into an epic battle in Syria that gives them that end of days scenario. And they will go to any lengths to draw us in. That includes nuclear, biological, or chemical attacks. It includes attacks on our infrastructure, our dams, our waterways. It includes attacks on our children. And I think we should expect that. Look at what's going on in Pakistan.
Absolutely.
Pakistan is always a testing ground for what's going to come here.
Try it there,
That's where
bring
they
it here.
try it out. Mm-hmm. And in the last year, they've attacked children multiple times. What a lot of folks don't know, guess what? Those are the children, in many cases, except this last attack, of the children of the Pakistan military forces fighting tribal groups and Taliban groups and Al-Qaeda in the federal administrated tribal areas.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it just shows that they will come for your kids, for retribution, for revenge, for honor-based stuff. These
and
guys.
If we look at the San Bernardino,
absolutely,
they possibly were going for someone's kids.
Absolutely, and because they know how emotional that will make us, right?
And what does that do? It puts us on that big ship that heads over to Dabiq, playing right into what they've been trying to draw us into in the beginning.
Absolutely, and also think about how would we respond at home, because you already see a lot of language. I mean, even Donald Trump is talking about how we should not allow Muslims into the country. He's making some pretty strong statements about mosques and things like that. So let's think about this for just a second. And I'm going to ask everyone listening to this to just get outside your comfort zone for a second and kind of flip this thing. Think about the Islamic communities in the United States right now, where they are. Maybe there's some near you, mosques and things like that. How do you feel about them? How do you honestly feel about them?
A little nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
It's not something we see every day, but I've been into places where it's been, predominantly Muslim, and you can feel a bit like an outsider.
Yeah, right. And how about Europe? How do you think Europeans are feeling about these guys right now?
Not good.
And so if you stop and think about it for a second, what would happen if, say, ISIS mounted 3 attacks against elementary schools in the Midwest and, hundreds of our kids, unfortunately, were killed? What would be the gut reaction of red-blooded Americans around the country toward these Islamic communities?
Well, the same thing that happened in 1941.
And that was what?
Internment camps.
Right. And I don't think that's a stretch. Look, if we're sitting here having this conversation in the Man Up Report studio, right?
Absolutely.
In sunny Tampa, Florida, do you think we're the first 2 people that have ever had this conversation?
I'm not really sure. I wouldn't think so. No.
Yeah, especially when you consider that one of the primary ISIS narratives is Islam is under attack by the West, and it's the duty of every Muslim to defend it. Now, that narrative resonates around the world. If there was a cataclysmic attack in the United States that hit our kids, and we over-indexed, we over-responded, and we went
Which we tend to do.
We do. And when you wake the sleeping giant, and all of a sudden we go high order on how we interact with Muslims in this country, how does that play into the ISIS narrative then?
Yeah, and the most interesting thing is if you look and you really get into the detail of the Muslim communities in this country, they're not even of the brand that ISIS is mostly formed around.
No, but what they do, what they could be, and here's why. Who do ISIS and Al-Qaeda exploit? They exploit marginalized Islamic communities that are beyond the reach of the government where they're living. Let me give you an example. Sunni Iraq,
Sure.
right? The Sunni tribes of Iraq, those are the same tribes that we worked with when Petraeus was there in 2006 with the Anbar Awakening. We were friendly with these tribes. The coalition forces actually mobilized them to stand up and defeat Al-Qaeda in Iraq under Zarqawi. Guess who that was? Those were the predecessors to ISIS. Those were the same guys. Those were the same guys who were treating Sunnis terribly, and the Sunni tribal folks got tired of it. They rallied with coalition forces, and they fought back.
Right.
Now, fast forward, we abandoned them in 2011.
Keyword, we abandoned.
We abandoned them in 2011. We pulled out of that country, and the Shia-dominated government under Maliki that we installed slaughtered.
Absolutely. And that's a big
Sunni
thing that I
tribes.
don't think people here understand is that when we left, it wasn't a lot of ISIS that came in. The Shia government came in and dominated and did horrific things to that Sunni community.
Absolutely. And what they did was they marginalized that Sunni community to such a degree that the narrative of ISIS and what they were about was very attractive because these folks had to survive.
Now, keep in mind, these were the guys that were on our team.
These were the guys that were on our team. So let's just take that model and transplant that model into the model that I gave you in the United States, where an attack has now happened on the schools. Right? These communities are now feeling like what? How are they feeling about the rest of America? Their backs are to the wall. Right? Now, how is recruiting looking inside these communities?
It's looking really good.
Really good. And once again, the ISIS narrative that was preset. This is the biggest bait and switch in history, Wes. It's the biggest bait and switch in history, and all of the pieces are being. And I'm not some conspiracy theorist.
No, you're just thinking forward.
I'm just playing it forward. And again, if I'm the first guy that's come up with this, that is friggin' outstanding. I'm so happy that I was actually
put your TM on that.
You know, because I've actually had people say, Scott, shh, don't say that, man. You'll give them ideas. Really? You think what I'm coming up with, these guys haven't thought of? And so what that does, that's a cop-out to not think through what's in the realm of not only the possible, but this is, in the military, we're taught to look at the most probable course of action and the most dangerous course of action. Right. My personal opinion, what I just laid out for you is the most probable course of action within the next 2 years of our country.
It's easy.
It's so easy. And if you look, Western Europe is your harbinger of what's coming. They're testing it out right now.
If you look at our political scene right now, we're set up with two particular candidates that over swinging is that's in their ballpark.
Absolutely. And ISIS is, they are committed. They're pushing hard. They're not going to wait. They're patient in the sense that they will look for the opportunities, but they are very aggressive. They're not like Al-Qaeda who just kind of sit back and conspire quietly over time. ISIS is always got their shoulder up against the wall pushing.
Right.
They're always pushing against the status quo, and they're not going to relent because they are driven by an end of days scenario. They think the clock is ticking on them. They believe they're running out of time. They've got to go. And so their sense of urgency is not to be underestimated. So, and I know this is some heavy stuff, man. It really is. But I'm just, the whole reason I go on the media, I hate the media. I hate going on the news.
4-minute sound bites.
I'm a Green Beret, man. That was, that was the one thing we would run from.
Yeah.
Was the press. We didn't like the press. We were trained not to, and they weren't helpful. But as I watch what's going on today and who's on there talking, it's these same talking heads that were, want, like Charlie Brown's teacher after 9/11, who we all listened to. But now here we are 15 years later, right? The longest war in our nation's history, 3 times longer than World War II.
Your son was 2.
Yep, he was
and now
2.
He's 17, fixing to go away to fight the same war
that I didn't finish.
That you didn't finish.
That I didn't finish. And I've got these same tool sets, talking at me, saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So, I've just reached a point where it's okay, you know what? I'm going to go on the media and I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to go to town halls. Mission America is going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's why really I asked you to do this podcast, because I think that Americans are ready to listen to what's really going on.
To become aware.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like the average listener, like myself, I'm sitting in my house in Tampa, Florida. There isn't a sense of, what can I do? But now that I've heard this information, what can I do? I mean, obviously, someone's got to have an idea. Someone's got to lay out a game plan. And I'm going to step out here and say that in reading your book, I see a game plan.
Yeah. The book Game Changers, I decided to write that really coming out of, when I got ready to retire. It was clear to me that no one was really taking notes on what we were doing to fight this enemy. And I just described the enemy to you. But what I will tell you, man, is right after 9/11, my Ranger buddy, Cliff Patterson, was killed. And he was killed in the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. And I was so ticked off. I mean, Cliff was a dear friend of mine. We had been together literally since Ranger School in 91. We had crossed paths multiple times. He was a wonderful infantry officer. He was a kid, grew up on the streets of D.C. and no family to speak of. He had spent time with my house. He was an African American. I was a redneck from Arkansas. No two more unlikely buddies than me and Cliff, but we were extremely tight. And when he died, I was just so ticked off and so bent on revenge. And I'll tell you, I wasn't alone, Wes. I mean, most of the military, most of the nation felt compelled to go put scalps on the barn, to pursue revenge and get payback for what happened. And for the next 10 years, from 2001 to 2010, that's essentially what our country did. Mm-hmm. And it was around late 2009, 2010 that Special Forces, even though we were supposed to be the Lawrence of Arabia, we spent most of our time manhunting. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. We grew beards. Yeah, we lived out in the hinterlands, but we were wearing body armor and kit, and we were killing Taliban. That was business was good. But
slaying bad guys.
But when we looked around in 2009, we saw that there were as many Taliban as when we started. Yeah. And here President Obama was now in office talking about withdrawal, and just a cold chill went down our spine coming out of our last deployment, because we were like, you know what? We're nowhere near where we need to be. And now we're talking about leaving, right? So we got back to our roots and started working a different approach in Afghanistan. And that's what my book is about. It's about the mistakes that we made and just being honest about those mistakes, because let's face it, we were ticked off. We were angry after 9/11 to lose thousands of our own people and just be sucker punched like that. We were so ticked off. And so it was easy to get emotional and respond that way. And we really played right into their hands. But we spent a decade, we got to the point we were spending $16 million for every Taliban that we killed in 2005, according to Antonio Gustosi.
That's a hell of a price tag.
Can you believe that? No. I mean, that you can't sustain that in warfighting. I mean, you're going to become fiscally insolvent if you pursue that over time. And they know that. They brag about the death of 1,000 cuts. I mean, they follow insurgency doctrine very well. And if you're spending $16 million, we were spending billions, if not trillions of dollars in economic development packages that weren't even making it down to the villages. They were being used in patronage systems to pay off different tribal chiefs. And it was actually, that large economic development we were doing, not only was it not what locals wanted, it was actually recruiting Taliban because it was marginalizing certain tribes. And then finally, from a governance perspective, we tried to put in place a Jeffersonian democracy, in
a status-based society?
In a tribal society. We tried to, and again, we meant well. Mm-hmm. This was not like callous.
No.
If you think back to, I think the Bush administration really meant well. I think that we were intent. We wanted payback, but we were intent. Our motives for the democracy and that approach were sincere. Right. But at the end of the day, it didn't work. And by 2010, we had really imposed what I call in the book this top-down strategy, top-down governance, top-down economic development, top-down security, where we were pushing all these things from Kabul, from Washington, D.C., down out into these outlying tribal areas. 80% of Afghanistan is tribal, right? And in its best of times, from the 1920s to the 1970s, before the Soviets, before the United States, when it was fairly stable, even then, The government of Kabul never was able to project development or governance top down. Tribes resolved their own disputes. Tribes grew their own crops. Tribes had their own midwives. Tribes had their own militia, right? The only time the government of Afghanistan got involved in anything in that country was if the tribes got out of line, they might go down there and thump some heads for a little while and then pull back. But the point is, everything in Afghanistan was bottom up. But yet we tried to come top down. So by 2010, we decided to change it. We decided, and oh, by the way, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, guess how they co-opted Afghanistan? Guess how they co-opted Iraq? Bottom up. They went into these communities and they worked at a local community level and they mobilized these villages one village at a time until they strung enough together that they would stand up against the government of Iraq, the coalition, whoever.
Yep.
And we decided to do the same thing, to get back to our roots as Green Berets, to be modern-day Lawrence of Arabia, and move into villages that were willing to resist and fight the Taliban, fight Al-Qaeda, fight ISIS. And it worked. It worked really, really well. The only problem was we did it too late in the war.
And got pulled out.
And our politicians and our policymakers and, frankly, even some of our senior generals like Petraeus didn't fully understand the program.
Right.
That it was going to be a long-term thing, and they pulled us out. But I'm here to tell you, if we're going to beat ISIS, even for police forces in the United States, Wes, if we're going to do away or deal with transnational gangs and extremely violent gangs, the bottom-up local community approach where we work with community leaders.
Sure.
And I'm not talking about kumbaya and hugs. I'm talking about empowering local leaders to do what they're designed to do. Because right now they're hiding in the shadows.
Like if we go into a place, for example, like Dearborn, Michigan, for example, has a very high concentration, very high Muslim population. What you're saying is repeat the steps that you took in Afghanistan here in the States and go into these communities and create that bridge, put someone in an advisory position and... Yeah,
absolutely. Because the locals in these... Look, here's the thing. Most of these communities where gangs and ISIS and Al-Qaeda, how did they exploit these communities? They go in there because these communities are ticked off at the government.
Exactly.
And they use that simmering honor and desire for revenge to their advantage, and they manipulate it.
Because even though, we are living in a contract society here, the internals of a lot of these communities are still status-based.
Yeah, absolutely. And by contract society, what we really mean is just rule of law. We live in a country that's rule of law, and most of the places around the world where ISIS sets up shop, like Afghanistan and like Iraq, they're what's called status society, where it's all about tribal honor and revenge and feud. And your status is, it's everything, right? It's as an individual, as a group, and it's all you worry about. So your honor and revenge is always being pursued. And ISIS uses this brilliantly. Gangs use this brilliantly.
Yeah, very well.
I travel all over the country talking to police forces about this. In my book, in the back, I've got a vignette, Salinas, California, where a police chief, Kelly McMillan, is using this bottom-up approach, and he has totally turned around the neighborhood of Hebron. This approach works, I'm telling you. It's a deep approach, and I saw it time after time after time in the roughest places on the planet where we worked with communities to stand up on their own. What I would like to do now, Wes, if we could, how we've been doing on time, man?
We're good, man. I mean, this is a long form media.
Yeah, cool.
People that listen to these podcasts, they want details, they want information, so we're good.
All right, so what I thought we might do is a pivot here,
Sure.
Because let's think about what we've covered. We've covered who the enemy is, particularly ISIS, and how they operate and what they want. And you asked me earlier, what should Americans do? Look, here's what I would suggest to you, because I know you're like me. You watch the news, you just want to throw a shoe at the television and turn it off. And you think, man, there's just nothing I can do, so I'm just not going to watch. What I would say is go counter to the culture here. I encourage every American to learn as much as you can about this enemy. Don't lean on your politicians or Fox News or CNN to inform you. That's just BS.
And this isn't fear-mongering. This is just education.
Absolutely.
Educate yourself about the existential threat that's actually out there. And here's the thing. We've just presented a very dark situation, a very dark path. And this is reality. But there is a way out of this.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think people need to understand. If they could learn about the enemy or learn about what's happening and realize that you have given us a very clear path out.
Yeah, I think there is a path out, and it was actually forged in some of the roughest places on the planet by warriors, many of whom are not around anymore. And all I did was take good notes, and I'm telling their story because many of them don't have a voice.
But bringing it to light.
Yeah, there is a way to defeat this enemy, just like there was a way to defeat communists and there was a way to defeat Nazis and fascists. I believe that. And as you know, I think any American listening to this, either believes that or wants to believe that. And so if we're going to, if we're going to decide, if we're going to win, the first thing every American has to do is decide you want to win.
Absolutely.
Like if you're playing football, right, or basketball in a game and you're not sure you want to win, how's that going to go?
You're not going to do very well.
No. I mean, so that sounds so basic, but really, I mean, if you're listening to this, have you decided and committed that you want to win? I've had so many people come up to me at town halls and go, yeah, Scott, but man, I mean, this is really complicated. Do you really think we can win? Well, no, I don't, if that's your attitude, genius, because you can't win that way, but we've got so much Novocaine injected in our heart, Wes, that we've actually conditioned ourselves that we're incapable of winning, and I just don't buy that. I cannot hand that over to my sons. I can't.
No. And my son's
absolutely.
coming up.
Yeah, you can't do that. And I think if you're listening to this, you probably feel the same way. I mean, search your heart, but you got to decide. This is an emotional decision. I get that. But decisions that matter start with emotion.
Exactly.
Not logic. You got to decide if you want to win or not. And if you want to win, then step into the ring. Step into the ring with the rest of us, or not that many of us,
2%,
who've made the decision that we want to win too. And then the next thing is you got to know your enemy, right? The Sun Tzu, know your enemy, know yourself, right?
Absolutely.
So let's start with the enemy. Let's get smart on who we're facing here. I've already told you in less than an hour who they are, and I've given you a very, very clear Achilles heel that they are using. Horrific social control on locals abroad and here in the United States.
And we can just call that horrorism.
Horrorism.
Because it is a step beyond terrorism.
And when you treat people that way, people who are treated that way want to fight back. They've got to be empowered to do so. But if you're coming at them only from the top down and you're lumping them into the same category as the bad guys and you're dropping bombs on all of them, then you are playing right into the bad guys' narrative and you are ignoring the golden egg that's been laid in front of you.
And the golden egg that is laid in front of us is that we have all these communities in this country and in Europe. We have massive Muslim populations here that, let's face it, the majority of these people just want the same things that we want. They want to be able to eat. They want to be able to take care of their kids. They want to be able to have a job, go to work, have opportunities, and to live their lives, practice their religion the way they want to.
Yep.
They don't want horrorism in their lives.
Nope. They
and
don't.
So you're showing us a way to make that connection.
Absolutely. And even the communities you and I live in, I don't think we do enough at a community level here. I mean, we don't, everybody's just kind of given up on the community. Everybody's just in their own world. There's a great book.
I don't let my kid play in my front yard. That's,
Absolutely.
I live in a great neighborhood.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about that. Actually, what has allowed ISIS to thrive is the same problem we have in America, which is the absence of trust.
Yes.
Right? But for now, what I want you to do, I'd love you to read Game Changers, and all my proceeds go back west to Mission America. I don't make any money on the book. It actually goes back to Mission America, the nonprofit that's really part of this show.
Yes.
Where we reconnect warriors and citizens along all kinds of different lines and help them come home and help them lead us. But Game Changers is a book that even if you just read the first 3 chapters, you'll know more about the enemy than any politician in Washington.
You'll know more about the enemy than you will ever hear on any news station ever.
Yep. And then the other thing is go to therealmissionamerica.org. You could go to victorygarden.com, or you could go to contracttoprotectamerica.org. Any of those. And we'll push those out. They're all affiliated with Mission America. And they're all designed to mobilize Americans to stand up and to help get informed. There's one document too, Wes, that I'd love listeners to go check out, and we've generated it. We created it. It's called the Contract to Protect America.
Absolutely.
And it's located at contracttoprotectamerica.org.
And we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure. And this contract is a 10-point contract that was forged on the battlefield by warriors, law enforcement, expeditionary diplomats. It really encompasses the key principles and tenets of what we've talked about here today and that are in my book, that if our politicians would follow this thing, we would start seeing an immediate change in our ability to defeat ISIS. Immediate. It's a 10-point contract with things like name your enemy. When your enemy presents you with a local vulnerability, like how they treat locals,
Absolutely.
exploit it. You know, there's all kinds of stuff in this contract. It's very sound. It's very practical. And if you're listening and you're thinking, man, how in the world am I going to evaluate a candidate? How in the world am I going to know who to pull the lever for in this election? Well, you know what? Take the 10-point contract, read it. If it makes sense to you, use that as a way to not only evaluate your candidate, go to their town halls, write them, call them, say, hey, are you willing to say Islamist? You know, I define Islamist as someone who projects violence on anyone who doesn't subscribe to their radical view of Islam. Will you subscribe to that as well?
Yeah. There's a massive difference between Islamic and Islamist.
And Islamist, that's right. And if you ask our politicians, are they willing to name the enemy? Are you willing to name the enemy an Islamist or ISIS? Are you willing to say that? Because a lot of them are not.
No
you
one
know?
is.
And if they're not, then I'm going to be very careful about who I pull the lever for.
Absolutely.
You know, so the contracttoprotectamerica.org is a great way to take action as an American citizen. And again, Wes, I know it's frustrating, man. I get frustrated all the time, but the fact of the matter is you can achieve a lot. I learned this as a Green Beret in some of these rough places. You can punch above your weight. Yeah. All of us can, you know, and especially if we go back to back with like-minded folks, regardless of party. This isn't Republican or Democrat. I'm a very apolitical guy on this issue. This is an American issue, you know, and we need what we need in this country to defeat ISIS. We go back to deciding to win is a victory garden mindset.
Absolutely.
You know, in World War II, Americans didn't have enough food to feed the troops. We had 1 million troops in the Pacific and the European theater, and not enough food to feed them plus our own population. The government admitted that, so the American people stepped up, and they grew what was called victory gardens in coordination with the government. And about 20 million victory gardens around the country, on the rooftops in New York, small half-acre plots in New Mexico and Alabama, combined to produce 9 to 10 million tons of food to feed not just our troops, but our population. That amount of food, Wes, was more than the government was able to produce themselves. A complete game changer in the war. And it showed what an informed and mobilized citizenry can do when they're all in.
And the key first word, informed.
Absolutely. When you're informed, then you're mobilized because you know what you're up against. If you just allow Fox News and CNN and these so-called experts to paint the picture of ISIS as this salivating 8-foot giant that's sitting in the corner with red eyes waiting for you to take your eye off your children, that's how you will treat them, and they will achieve the social paralysis and the social control that they want. If we get informed as Americans and we see these guys for who they really are, yeah, they're still scary, but guess what? That's part of life. We've dealt with scary stuff our whole life as Americans. We know how to do that. And then we start to see that they actually have vulnerabilities. There are actually ways to take them on. Another example of a vulnerability. These guys are setting people on fire. They are cutting people's heads off. They are slaughtering Christians, Yazidis, and other minorities. They've killed more Muslims than any other religion. But yet, where is the outcry or the challenge from the responsible citizens of the world and the United States against this? In World War II, a guy named Frank Capra produced a documentary called Why We Fight.
Yep.
Right?
I know it well.
And what was that documentary about?
It was about the reason it showed the tyranny and everything that was happening with Germany and Japan and the reason we needed to get in the game.
Absolutely. And what it did was, at a time when Hitler was starting to gain, with his narrative, some traction, it cut his knees out globally on his narrative. Are you telling me that we couldn't mount a why we fight kind of campaign, or someone couldn't in the world against what ISIS is doing. I find that hard to believe, but yet we're not doing
And
it.
you brought up a very interesting point. They're killing more Muslims
Absolutely.
than anyone else.
Yep.
I mean, how can we help the Muslim community rise up against their own existential threat?
Absolutely. And what happens when you ask that question, though, that's when the Muslim Brotherhood and these other political operatives swoop in,
Yeah.
and they silence you and they muzzle you.
Yeah.
And they use our own political system to paint you as a racist, as a warmonger, as an Islamophobe, or whatever. And we have to fight through that. We had to do this in Afghanistan with the local program we were running, and we have to say, excuse me, I will not be silenced. Yeah. I'm going to talk responsibly about this program, and I'm going to talk with responsible community members of all religions and ethnicities as Americans.
Yeah, because this is an American problem.
Absolutely, it's a world. Europe is facing the same thing. And if we don't do this, if we allow these political operatives like the Muslim Brotherhood and others to muzzle us, all we have to do to know what's coming our way is just look at Western Europe.
Oh, it's happening.
Absolutely. And it will manifest here. The same indicators that were happening in Western Europe 10, 15 years ago, where political correctness muzzled responsible leadership at a community level, it's happening here. And if we don't take stock of that and we don't take note of that, then we will have blood on our hands.
Yeah, I think a lot of Americans don't, and I know we've gone long here, but this is a real short one. I think a lot of Americans don't understand as free and liberal as Europe proclaims to be. If you're in a Muslim community in Europe, they're very isolated. They're very cut off. Right. They're not encouraged to connect with society. I mean, there are entire places in, let's say, France, for example, where there are completely Muslim-dominated communities. They have a whole infrastructure of themselves that doesn't branch out of that community, and they're isolated. Right. So if we, as Americans, create that isolationism here, as if we react against Muslim communities here, we're going to suffer that same fate.
Absolutely. And it's played out time and time again. And we saw it in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Once we moved into these communities in Afghanistan, and we'll talk more about this in the next podcast, we started to see an immediate turnaround. Exactly. And when we started working with locals on a local level to just connect and move forward, it was very powerful. And, I'll just pivot briefly there and say, for anyone listening to this, if you are, if you're a leader, if you're a community leader, if you're a teacher, if you're a business leader, the most powerful solutions in our society, especially in a society that's skeptical, that's lacking trust, and that just seems to be buried in their iPhones, it's local. If you want to have an impact, it's bottom up. It's immersing yourself in the problem. There are enough people sitting around in the bleachers admiring the problem, aren't there? I mean, so many people are admiring the problem and telling us how we can't solve it. Yep. You give me a leader that's run some miles and got some scars and is willing to get surrounded on purpose and get into the problem and live in the problem and go shoulder to shoulder with me and live that problem.
Exactly.
I'm going to follow that dude anywhere.
Exactly.
I'm going to follow that girl anywhere because they're legit. They're authentic. And so as we wrap up today, and I'll throw it over to you for any closeout questions or anything, I would like everyone listening to this to think about your life, think about your family, think about your community, and understand that the big things that matter in life, whether it's politics or national security or the economy, they start locally.
Absolutely.
It's not over there. It's not those guys. If you outsource your status, your future, your well-being, your resilience, your peace of mind to a bunch of, bureaucrats and politicians and corporate guys who have no interest in you, then you get what you deserve.
Absolutely.
Right? Especially in a country where we have the ability, for those, anyone listening outside the country, I mean, I don't know to what degree it pertains there, but in America, for sure, we have the ability, at least for now, to pursue our own dreams, to stand up for ourselves, and to leave tracks in this world and do the things we were designed to do. And, I really want to see in our future, in my kids' future, I want to see more people standing up for that at a community, local level and not being afraid to punch above their weight. On this issue, on the education of our kids, the economy, all those things. And so that's the seed I want to plant as we go out of here. Go learn about ISIS. Don't take what the pundits tell you, but more importantly, start thinking about your own life, because if you're going to roll with me, if you're going to roll with Brother Wes here on this podcast, we're going to punch above our weight, right? We're not going to sit on here and pontificate and pursue theory. We're going to talk about the stuff that we've done, the stuff that other leaders we're going to bring on the show have done that are way above their pay grade, way above their weight class, right?
Even a Green Beret.
Absolutely. And I think that's what all of us in our heart were put here to do.
Absolutely.
Right? What do you think, man?
I think it's great. Again, people look at, if you're listening, please go to the Contract for America.
It's contracttoprotectamerica.org.
.org. Go there, start there, and just listen up, learn a little bit, and come visit us once a week.
Yeah, you know what, man? One other thing is if you go on my Facebook page,
right,
it's official Scott Mann, I think is how you find it. You can also follow me on Twitter at @DScottMann, 2 T's, 2 N's. Man, I got a lot of stuff going on out there, but if you follow me or on Facebook, we just did a really cool animation. Have you seen it?
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's like the book. We took 4 years of research and writing of this book, and we distilled it down to like 4-minute cartoon.
That's important.
Yeah, and so if you are somewhere between the Kardashians and The Bachelor, right, and you just don't have time to dig into Game Changers, go to my Facebook page and check out, it's called What ISIS Fears the Most. And it's what we've been talking about right here, and it's one little village that I characterize in the cartoon. And at the end of it is you can sign the contract, right? Yep. And it's really, really important to do that. So, yeah, that's it, man. I think we'll probably wrap here.
Sounds great.
And for those listening, look, thanks for being here. Share this with your tribe. Leadership starts with us. It starts with you and me. It's about our family, our kids, our friends, and taking a stand. I've learned this. If I've learned anything as a Green Beret, serving with these amazing guys, is that you can achieve things you never thought possible if you take a stand with a small elite band of warriors, and it's the kind of people like you are listening to this. So share this with your tribe. Get it out there. Let's start building this. Leadership's a movement. It's a bottom-up, grassroots kind of movement, and it starts with us, and I think you'll be real surprised at what will get done. Wes, I'll throw it over to you, buddy.
Well, retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, thank you very much. This is the Man Up Report. We're going to see you next week, and don't forget to Green Beret.
I fell asleep around Macon, running 80 on Highway 75. 18 years old, yeah, thinking I was good to go. Stone cold miracle, I survived. I took out 3 Georgia pine trees, turned that car to a pile of scrap. I walked away without a scratch. Well, that should have been a self-correcting mistake, kind of thing that leaves you wide awake. All it did was feed my bulletproof. So many times that I cheated death, when people I love died for less. Whole lot of second chances that I blew. You ask me how I got here, how I found this place. The devil tried hard, but when fate cut the cards, it was God's grace. Fast forward to an angry young man fighting in the hills of Afghanistan, living for the moment on a one-way track. I learned my trade and I learned it good. I learned the value of brotherhood. Still cuts me like a knife, the ones that didn't make it back. Well, I can see their faces when I close my eyes. Brother, you can bet as long as I'm alive, they'll live on like a solid gold country song. So many times that I cheated death, when people I love died for less. Sometimes it don't seem right that I live on. how I got here, and how I found this place. The devil tried hard, but when fate cut the cards, it was God's grace. I've never been one to look back. The one thing stopped me in my tracks was when they laid that baby girl in my arms. With all the demons I'd protected and the skeletons I'd collected started turning loose with a cold grip on my heart. I guess I found a little clarity. For once in my life I could finally see it ain't my job to understand. And all of the times that I cheated death, when people I love died for less, only God knows a plan. Only God knows a plan. Ooh, yeah. You asked me how I got here, how I found this place. The devil tried hard, but when fate cut the cards, it was God's grace.